You're listening to the Corbett Report.
Hello friends, James Corbett here, CorbettReport.com, Friday, November 23rd, 2018. I guess it's Turkey Day in the US. It's no such day here in Japan, but it is a holiday, so the kids are running around in the background, and I am hard at work, as I'm sure you can appreciate, putting the finishing touches on Part 3 of the World War I conspiracy documentary, which will be released next week. Stay tuned for that. In the meantime, I'm going to post the audio and video of a sort of podcast spectacular roundtable that was hosted the other day by Ricky Verandas of the Ripple Effect podcast, which I've been a guest on several times in the past, so I hope you're familiar with the Ripple Effect. And this is a multiple-way conversation between myself and Ricky and Sam Tripoli of the Tinfoil Hat podcast and Pat Miletich and Jeffery Wilson of the Conspiracy Farm podcast. So if you're unfamiliar with all these different podcasts, of course the links to all of them will be in the show notes for this conversation, and it's a pretty interesting one. I hope you enjoy. But for the people with sensitive ears or young children in the audience, there is copious four-letter words and other things being peppered throughout this conversation, not by yours truly, of course. But at any rate, that is a bit of a warning, but I hope you enjoy the conversation, and I will see you again next week.
Well, anyways, while I'm trying to figure out how to throw myself on the screen, I want to thank you guys for being on. I really, really appreciate it. As you guys know, I'm a huge fan of all your work, because that's why you guys have been on the show in the past, and I don't have anybody on who I'm not a fan of. And we're all trying to do the same thing. We're all attempting to get attention on stories and spark conversations that we think there's not enough attention on. And no better way than getting all of us together to help do that. But also, I think one thing that's I think will make for a very interesting conversation is the fact that we all have so much in common when it comes down to our curiosity and our interests, but yet we come from very different backgrounds. So I think talking about topics that we're all into and intrigued with, it'd be awesome to just see what everybody's perspective is based on this. Pat's never not working. He's well, he's that's the right
Skype selfie. I've never seen that before.
Right, right. You just invented something there, champ.
But yeah,
post it out there.
Well, unfortunately, I think today it's quantity over quality. I think people who are super active, even if it's not quality work, those are people who get attention. So, but hopefully we can spark a really good conversation. One thing that we briefly talked about James's great work, and I mentioned it on one of our previous emails. I think World War I is definitely one of those topics people don't know enough about, and I love the fact that you spend some time to do a documentary on it, because I mean I've done a lot of World War I research, and there's so much stuff that I had no idea about in your up to Part 2, which came out previously. And I've watched Promises and Betrayals, Blood and Oil, or I think that's what it's called. There's a couple really good documentaries, and not even those scratch the surface compared to what your work has done. And that's kind of what we've come to know from James Corbett and the Corbett Report, is that you really do thorough research, and we can always count on this amazing work when it does come out. And so thanks again, James, for doing that for everybody. If you haven't checked it out, please check it out. It's on his website. It's also on YouTube. It's all open source. So, but that's really important too. Support everybody's work, because that's the other thing too, is that a lot of people, James was just a teacher at one point, and then decided to do this alternative media, and now he's been lucky enough to do this for a living, and it's because of the support, and he puts all his stuff out there for free. So I know we live in a world where it's really easy just to consume free content because there's so much of it, and not support. But if we love the work that they're putting out there, we have to remember that the way we continue getting that work is supporting them. So that's super important too.
I think James has a brand of excellence that within the community is the gold standard. I think everybody kind of looks to his work and realizes that this is probably the most legit shit you're ever going to get. And there's a lot of respect in that. I learned a lot about Hitler from James's videos. For me, it's like it was wide open. And, and for me in my podcast, I'm not even going to pretend that I'm in like a realm with what James is doing, because I'm kind of trying to get people to be like the training wheels or kind of the like, conspiracy for dummies, and that, give it a little bit of information, and hopefully they'll go out there. And I tell them to go listen to like people like Conspiracy Farms, the Higher Side Chats, the Corbett Report. I think what James does and what we all do is very, very important, and that we're fighting against billions of dollars that are spent to basically brainwash these people. And, I live in LA, which is the heart of a lot of this stuff, the brainwashing and all that. And with these fires that we've seen, like these are some dark arts fires. I don't care what anybody says. And you look at like the burn patterns, and it just doesn't make any sense. And here we go again. The conspiracists are being demonized, just like after the JFK shootings and then 9/11 and then Vegas and all that stuff. And, it's people like James. And, it's Conspiracy Farms get some really amazing guests on. And it's just, I just am really thankful to be on this call. And I'm really enjoying what everybody's doing who are involved in this podcast right now.
I'd love for James, and I know he's going to, the World War I stuff has always fascinated me. And I'd love, obviously can't go over everything here, but, for the dummies, the bullet points, and because this stuff is so important for people to learn history, about those wars, how they were started, fomented, and it's super, super important.
It's incredibly important, and I'm glad to see that a lot of people have resonated with this. I truly wasn't expecting people to be interested in this at all. I'll let you guys in on a little secret just between us four and anyone who happens to be listening in. This is part of a larger documentary project that I'm working on. The World War I conspiracy is only the first part of it. So I was expecting, until this whole project is finished, I wouldn't think people would even kind of get what's going on. But I'm glad a lot of people have resonated with it. And I'm glad to hear that this has provided a lot of information for people that they haven't heard of. But for me, from my perspective, my nightmare is trying to compile thousands of pages of research down into here's a half hour on this, 15 years of history, and here's a half hour on this other 5 years. It's horrible. It's nightmarish for me because I'm just sitting here. How do I do this? So I'm glad to hear that. But if people are interested in this, they really should start delving into the sources where there are literally hundreds and hundreds of pages of documentation on just that first part, that first half hour of the documentary. You can find in books like Hidden History by Dr. D. McGregor that has so much more detail to it. But the long story short, I guess, is coming from sources like this, The Anglo-American Establishment by Carroll Quigley, where he talked about the formation of a secret society in the late 1890s. It started to come together in the 1880s, but really formalized in some form in the 1890s. And it's a secret society, but we know about it. It's not a conspiracy theory. We know that this is true because one of the inside people in that conspiracy blew the whistle, essentially. William T. Stead, he was this journalist who was quite influential at the time. And after Cecil B. Rhodes's death in 1902, he blew the whistle, essentially. He published the last will and testament, which everyone thinks, Cecil Rhodes' last will and testament was establishing the Rhodes Scholarship. Yeah, that was his seventh will. The first six were all about this secret society that he wanted to found to spread the British Empire around the world and, unite the world under the English race, basically. And so he published all of this. As I point out in the documentary, it was even published in the New York Times and everything. Here was Cecil Rhodes' secret society that he founded. And Cecil Rhodes' idea was this is going to be a secret society organized like the Jesuits, this kind of Illuminati-ish thing with this inner circle, the secret society of the elect. And then there was going to be an outer circle that didn't even know of the inner circle's existence and all of this. And he wanted all of these different titles and everything. But the people he brought in to that conspiracy, like Alfred Milner, who the hell was Alfred Milner? You never get taught him in the history books these days, but he was extremely influential. And he was the one who basically started to organize this into something practical. It's like, oh yeah, all that hoodoo, focus pocus nonsense about secret societies. Let's make this something real. And he started really forming what was called Milner's Kindergarten in South Africa, of this group of young men that went on to hold all sorts of important posts in government and outside of government, in private industry as well, that basically formed this clique that could be drawn on to essentially operate what was the longer-term game plan, which in that first decade of the 20th century became, let's go to war with Germany. And that's what it all became about. And they used every single lever of power that they had in government and outside of government to make that happen.
Speak to that, James. Why was Germany such a threat? I mean, I realized once they became independent in 1871, that went straight against what those guys, Milner and those guys were trying to do. Why? Why was Germany such a threat?
Well, it's analogous, and this is actually what got me starting along these lines and why I started thinking about World War I, was because it is analogous to our situation today, which is we have the world empire, which in this case is the U.S., and we have the rising empire threat, which is China. And we see a lot of parallels going on. At that time, in early 20th century, it was the world empire was Britain, and the rising upstart was Germany, and they had to be defeated. They had to be put down. And that wasn't anything new to that era of history. Britain had always done that throughout history. Their entire strategy had always been to support the second strongest European continental power against the strongest, so that there would never be one that would rise up and would be able to challenge Britain's hegemony.
Coke versus Pepsi. That's Coke versus Pepsi. Like, they go at each other, but they make sure the third one doesn't come in.
This is where we have to understand it's like taking a 2D slice of a 3D object. So we see these kind of national strife situations like China and the U.S., and there is something there. There is this clash that's happening, and a lot of people are invested in that clash in a lot of different ways, sometimes quite literally invested. But that's really happening. But if you don't see the 3D picture of it, you don't really understand it. So in this case, in the China-U.S. case, the point that I always make is that China didn't just become this big emerging power. They were fostered into this power by the very same people who are also puppeteering the U.S. government and steering its foreign policies. How does this happen? Well, it's because it's part of a larger plan, ultimately, to get the world under a collectivist system, globalism, essentially, and
which is just so frustrating because nobody gets that, bro. Obviously a conspiracy theorist. Obviously, this is chess, not checkers. This people who talk against people who talk against conspiracy theorists. Your guys, William Steed, Reginald Brett, and Cecil Rhodes, they came up with this plan in 1891 to basically the long game to start war, and it took another 15, 16, 20 years before it really...
No. You see, their secret society was about peace. They wanted to bring peace to the world, but peace, of course, means peace under the British flag. And how do you do that? Oh, well, we need war.
Well, exactly. But I'm just saying, for the lay person who always poo-poos what we talk about, there is so much more nuance to this than people realize. It is the long game, as my boy Sam just said, and our attention spans are just so short. We're keeping up with the Kardashians over here. We don't think of the long game, and here it is. World War I was pretty much the template for the beginning of the Matrix as we know it today.
James, did you find anything that maybe has to do with like old biblical scripture in terms of like the lost tribes of Israel versus the pagans? There's, I did a whole episode with this guy who's like really, an expert in the Bible, and he broke down that there's a lot of like old scripture where it's like the lost tribes, which is Britain and the United States, with Israel versus the pagans, which is going to be led by Germany. Does that have anything to play in, or is that just, smokescreen stuff?
No audio.
Oh, yeah.
We can't
James,
hear you.
you have no audio. James, you have no audio.
Start that over, bud.
We can't hear you, James.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
I've only been doing this for a decade, guys. Come on. How am I going to know where the mute button is? I don't. That's a bit out of my area of expertise. But what I can talk about is the Zionist movement forming in the late 19th, early 20th century, extremely influential in so far as the Rothschild family, which of course was in a position of prominence in the early 20th century in Britain financially, and was trying to convert that into geopolitical power, and did so through, as we know, the Balfour Declaration came out in 1917. That was a letter from Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild saying, hey, you know, when this is all over, we're going to give you Palestine, essentially, as part of your Zionist dream of creating the homeland for the Jews. And that was, I mean, pretty interesting because, well, Britain didn't control Palestine at that point.
What's going on, Pat?
Pat, do you also have the mute button on?
Pat, you have the mute button. We can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Pat, there we go.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
I was doing the anti-Semite alarm going off for everyone that watches this who thinks that everyone here is against Israel and the Israeli people. So no, we're not. Just pointing out facts is what James is doing.
And that's
exactly
all it is.
Historical documented facts, the Balfour Declaration. But the interesting thing about the Balfour Declaration, it's presented as this was a letter from Arthur Balfour to Lord Rothschild. It actually started as notes that Rothschild sent over to Balfour and Milner. Yeah. And they took those notes and worked with them and made a letter to present back to Lord Rothschild. Yeah. So that's like the interesting part of it. It shows who was really in control of that relationship.
And while we're picking your brain, James, I'd like to ask you what your thoughts are on the supposed Albert Pike 1871 letter to Mazzini. I mean, I've known about that letter for quite a number of years. Whether it's factual, whether it was written by Albert Pike or not, I don't really care at this point because, well, I mean, it's at least prophetic in what's happening now. And the letter I know appeared many years ago, but whether it was written by Albert Pike, I don't know.
Have you ever seen it? I certainly haven't.
Well,
it doesn't exist as far as I'm aware.
What's that?
It doesn't exist as far as I'm aware. It's not real. I'd love to be proven otherwise. Anyone who can show me that letter or any proof that letter really exists in the archives anywhere, I'd love to see it. I don't believe it exists.
Okay.
And I'm certain it was written after World War II because the way that it predicted what was going to happen with the National Socialists in Germany and everything. I mean, come on, I absolutely don't believe it. But it's interesting that it does tap in to something that people understand is coming, and it is framing. That letter does ultimately frame the next stage of this. That is going to be a kind of a religious war, essentially, that eventually is going to lead to the bright light of Lucifer will be seen as the saving grace, and the masses will come to embrace and accept that. Is ultimately
you say that with a smile.
I do, because again, I don't believe that this is really predicting anything, except perhaps in terms of wish fulfillment for certain members of the elite, obviously. But I don't think, anything's been set in stone.
I think it's safe to say that World War III would be certainly, as it said, a cataclysmic event, right?
Absolutely, yes.
James, in your research, does black nobility come in at all? I've started to do some research on them and their roles, and as Jeffrey said before to me that, they make the Rothschilds look like accountants or secretaries. And I feel like nobody really knows about black nobility, and almost to this point where I sometimes begin to think that the Rothschilds are almost used as like a boogeyman type group, like Russia kicks out the Rothschilds, but they're still part of the Bank of International Settlements, which that runs all the centralized banks. So, like, what is there a power structure that goes beyond the Rothschilds, and that whether it's black nobility, the Black Pope, the royal family of England, it goes even deeper than that?
A couple of things to say. First of all, I don't believe in the monolithic conspiracy that there is one group or one family or one name or whatever that controls everything. I think that's a little too simplistic. Secondly, for people who are really in positions of real power and influence, if we know their name, they're probably not at the top of that ladder. So
precisely, their name. Yep. Exactly,
and it becomes that thing where, well, of course, there's no way we can really ascend to the top of that unless, some whistleblower comes out. But I think that distracts. My point is, it always comes back to that distracts us from the real point of this, which is that, yes, power is wielded by people with money and influence and control in ways that we probably can't even fathom. And you can research your entire life and probably never get to the bottom of that. But then you've spent your entire life just trying to research what they're doing. The point is what we can do with our own power, because we do have power and influence in our own lives. And yes, we can't control everything that happens in the world, and we can't control what the big powers are going to do in warfare and what have you, but we get to choose what we invest our time and energy doing with our lives. And that's the ultimate point of this for me, is that yeah, you can spend your whole life trying to chop off the heads of the beast. I tend to think even if you did find the head of that beast and chop it off, there'd be another one growing in days. I mean, the power vacuum would just be too much. And
the making the awareness that there is a beast, I think, is a huge problem. People don't think necessarily there is a beast in the first place.
The point is we are the heart of the beast. We pump the blood through the vessels of the beast. We are the willing participants in this system. Every time you buy one of their projects, every time you invest your time and energy in this, you are helping the beast.
Silence is acquiescence.
Exactly. If you take yourself out of that pyramid structure, it collapses. It needs us. That's the real point of this.
That's why I love the Morpheus picture. The Morpheus picture in the Matrix of him holding up the battery, saying that's basically what we are. It's just energy feeding it, and
take yourself out of that, and then the machine doesn't cooperate. We have to understand it's our responsibility to do that, and that's more important to me than trying to spend our entire lives finding out who's the head.
So now that you framed it that way, not spending our time going after them, but using our time constructively on what we can do to prepare, to mitigate whatever we can, the damage that's done to us personally, to our families, whatever, things like that. I say we start a PayPal to purchase a missile silo in Kansas and turn it into a condo.
Have you seen those? Those are so dope. Those are have you guys seen those before?
Well, no.
Well, yeah.
Oh, no, they're straight up missile silos that are like 15 levels, and they're straight, just triple A, dude. It's like you're walking into like a Mandalay Bay hotel. I'm serious. They're super sweet. And that was
I think we can pull it off. I think we can pull it off.
Well, they just gave away our plan. Damn it.
I think what James was saying is so important, because James and I have had this conversation and similar conversations many a times on the Ripple Effect podcast. And, we often emphasize the idea of trying to spark just thought and looking at things from a different perspective and how important that is. And to quote Sam, one of my favorite quotes is the revolution will be podcasted. And it's a great quote, because that's exactly what we're trying to do. And, the most dangerous people aren't people who are trying to change things with violence, but it's people who are changing minds and opening minds and changing perspectives, because that does cause a ripple effect. And a lot of times you get people, asking you, well, what are you going to do to change the world? Well, how are you going to change things? Almost acting like the simple thing of sparking thought and having a conversation and changing somebody's perspective isn't doing something. I think that's almost one of the most important things you could do, and probably can have the biggest impact. Who knows how many people are going to listen to this podcast, and even if that number is small, we're going to change their minds and maybe change the way they look at things, and they're going to have conversations with other people, and they're going to have conversations with other people, and and it does start this ripple effect. And when I started this show, it was because I truly believed in this idea that we can all make a difference. And I mean, you look at most of us, we besides Pat, who is a legendary Hall of Famer, but most of us come from pretty, normal backgrounds where, we didn't, we come from, we weren't well known for, James and I, and at least I know our backgrounds pretty well. We're basic, normal dudes who just kind of believed in trying to do something more with our lives, trying to do something more fulfilling, and doing some alternative news and alternative media in hopes that we can spread something. And so I think, conversations like this are so important. Like James said, we could focus so much on dissecting who's involved and connecting all the dots, and all that stuff is so important, because there are stories out there that do help you put the puzzle pieces together. Because I do think that this whole life is a giant has a million puzzle pieces, and we're all together trying to gather puzzle pieces. And if we all help each other out, we can gather enough puzzle pieces where at the end of the road, maybe we don't know what that image is, but we have a clear idea, we have a better idea of what it might be.
Or we pull a Matrix and have a moment like, there is no puzzle. Just like in the Matrix, I was wondering how to bend the spoon. There is no spoon. And I agree with what you're saying, and even I'll echo the sentiments of James as well. I mean, trying to, figure out who, what, where, what trajectory, how many bullets were shot, and Kennedy, or what's the melting point of steel, et cetera, et cetera. Once you get to the point that it wasn't that official story, I mean, you can't go down the rabbit hole a little bit, but just that recognition that you were just being lied to on such a crazy level. The World War I thing, not to go back to it, but you're talking about 3 or 4, maybe 5, 6, 7 individuals that hatched a plan, which a decade plus later killed 20 million plus people. Injured, another
and I think that's
millions.
important. It's important on the World War I thing to frame it, if James could, briefly for people who are watching this, because as you said, it's kind of the blueprint for future wars, for everything else that we've seen from that point forward. And so, for us, I mean, I feel like I'm completely mind fucked sometimes because we're called, lunatics and everything else when the war, and this was prophesized. We knew that this was coming, or people well before us knew that this was coming. And so I think it's important for us to be able to at least break through on that level, so that when a guy dies in Libya who was creating the gold coin, to trade his oil in, when Saddam Hussein dies because Europe is going to buy his oil without the U.S. dollar, all this sort of stuff, and so that people realize that no, we're not the fucking crazy ones here. We're not the lunatics. Yeah. So James, I'd like James to at least go through some of the points that caused World War I and stuff that people are not taught in the history books.
Well, there's a couple points I want people to take away from this documentary, one of which relates to our earlier discussion there. Just the amount of propaganda that was aimed at the public to get them into hating Germans in England and in America was phenomenal. And when you really drill down into it, that's where so much of our modern day propaganda templates come from, was that First World War, where they literally created the Bureau of Propaganda and all of that. And
babies on bayonets.
Exactly. Yeah, there was such a concerted effort, and they brought so much effort to bear on convincing the public. And one thing that speaks to is the fact that the public's opinion matters. They wouldn't be spending bajillions of dollars and all of this effort to try to convince the public to hate Germans unless it mattered what the public actually felt. So don't ever forget that it's your power that they're trying to take over, essentially, right, with this propaganda. The other part is, I hope people understand it's almost unimaginable the pre-World War I world to a post-World War I mindset, because everything that we know about the modern world came from that World War I period, or was started there or fostered there, including obviously technologically. This was the breaking point in terms of military history from the stately, 19th century kind of warfare where you would line armies up on a battlefield and they'd shoot at each other for a day. And you could even go with with your family for a picnic near the battlefield and watch it from afar. And, it would be like a spectator sport in some ways. You couldn't do that in World War I. And that's obviously, there's the technological changes that made that happen. The machine gun and the flamethrower and the airplane and the poison gas and the tanks and all of the other technological gadgets. But beyond that, and beyond the million casualty battles and things that were just utterly unimaginable before World War I, it was the intervention of the government in every aspect of society that would have been, if not unthinkable, at least would not have been very popular before that World War I crisis set in. And this was not only known about and acknowledged, but openly lusted after by a lot of people in the time. And this is actually what I'm going to get into in part 3. Which is yet to be released as we're recording this conversation. But I'm going to be talking about the John Deweys and the Richard T. Ely's and other people like that who were openly talking about, the war will be great to foster a new sense of national service in society, and to get people on board and to shape public perception and opinion. This is what people were lusting after for a long time. And in the American context specifically, you have the income tax coming in with the Federal Reserve in 1913. And
Woodrow Wilson.
Under Wilson, who was brought in by Morgan, bankrolled into office by Morgan, essentially. And that was the basis through which America was able to wage and finance the First World War, finance by, starting the the incredible debt that we know where it's ended up today, but also the idea of income tax and the government being in charge of the economy or managing the economy.
A central bank, which we had been against for so long.
A central bank for the first time in 80 years or whatever it had been at that point. So yes, it was an extremely important period for that transition into what we now expect. And it was really the precursor for the New Deal and all of that. It came from that World War I mentality where the government was going to take care of everything. And if we don't understand that aspect of it, then we don't really have a proper sense of history. And the fact that we are living in the crater of that explosion, as I say in the opening of the World War I documentary, if we don't understand that the way the world is now is not the way it has to be. This isn't just some inevitable progress to this point. This is something that happened because
but
people.
That's what I mean. To echo Pat's frustration. I mean, this is World War I. I mean, fast forward almost 100 years. The Kuwaiti ambassador's daughter talking about incubators getting knocked over. All of these. I mean, it's nothing has changed. They're literally playing from the same playbook. And again, we are so willing participants of it because we're just not aware how sophisticated the propaganda is and the behind the scenes. For people just want that shortcut to thinking, that fast food news, like what's going on? Oh, they're bad guys. Okay. As opposed to like, wow, this is a chess game and you are like several steps behind. And it's just so frustrating, bro, because at the end of your movie or just the second part, when we finally did get in the war, you saw those scenes of just guys dancing with girls in the streets, just getting piled on buses and ships. And they just went and died by the millions for bullshit, man.
Bankers,
it's crazy.
dude. Bankers.
It's crazy. And
Well, this is where the G. Edward Griffin's book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, is so important for every high school student in America to read. Man, I've read that thing like 4 times. There it is, man.
James.
Yes,
Nice.
one of the greatest books ever written. And that's the thing is, fast forward to Donald Trump, whether you like it.
Hold on, guys. Hold on. I mean, we know what that is. Let somebody fill that in. What happened at the Jekyll Island? That was a big deal.
That's when all the bankers got together and basically wrote the Federal Reserve Act and duped some politicians into passing it. Wilson won the election because they talked Roosevelt into running for a third term, if I'm not mistaken, against Taft and Wilson, and that was a banker's to get Roosevelt to run again. And here's the thing that's crazy, dude. Had Roosevelt gone on his Amazon expedition when he was supposed to, it would have never happened and time would have changed. Taft would have won that election and we would have never got the Federal Reserve because Taft was against it. But the bankers talked him into running. He did, took votes away from Taft. Wilson won. They already had Wilson in their hip pocket. Wilson was the one that pushed for this thing, got the Federal Reserve Act passed.
Well, they snuck it in a holiday or something over Christmas.
Yes, over Christmas. Most everybody was home. And the thing is about this is, it gives obviously the privateers control of everything. Many of whom are not even Americans, control of our monetary system, which should piss every American off. But and the reason I'm fast forwarding right now is to make the connection for people that might not know about it, is that Trump, whether you like him or not, on the campaign trail, spoke about getting rid of the Federal Reserve briefly. He made a couple tiny little blip mentions of it. And then he's mentioned it again a couple weeks ago. He talked about the Federal Reserve. And I think if he's reelected, which I think he will be, I think in his second term, he'll kill the Federal Reserve.
That's that.
I don't
think
not
so.
happening.
I'll bet you on that. Let's have a little wager on that one. How much
I just wanted to say something real quick. I think he wants to go down.
I think he wants to be remembered for something.
I think maybe he got in, dude, and then they're like, yeah, hey, we'll wipe your whole family out. And like, he's changed a little. But I just want to say something about what James said, that this isn't how it has to be. When Jeffrey's like, that's 100 years ago. In human time, that's a lifetime. But in like history, that's just a drop in the bucket, man. And we are in a place where we can turn this. I try to echo what James says. I say it poorly compared to how he says it, but we really are a very unique country, the United States. The global economy is completely built on us. And if we come together, we're a very powerful force. But this propaganda bill that Obama passed, which allows the government to use propaganda against us, is get us to not like each other, to get us.
Which was going on anyway. They just legalized it.
But this legalized it. But, everybody wants to make Chocolate Jesus this wonderful dude. And he's just par for the course, man. But this isn't how it has to be. We are the more powerful than them. I mean, dude, we don't have to sit here and take it, but everybody thinks we have to go between these two parties. It's like running between Dahmer and O.J. Simpson. You're like, they're both going to murder you. What are we doing here?
The masses just don't know. I had a conversation with Canadian journalist Eva Bartlett about, the occupation of ISIS in Syria. It's a horror movie. People do not get waking up to that every day, having your daughter kidnapped, possibly raped, organs taken. I mean, we just don't get over here how dark it is. We're in fantasy football mode, and the Rams are 7-1 or whatever it is. I'm not knocking. You could do it if you want to, but please balance it out with some level of information on the world, because silence is acquiescence. That's why all this stuff is so allowed to go down, because we're so blissfully ignorant.
We are.
Well, but Sam sounds hopeful that we can actually make a difference. That we're going to somehow bring Americans together to be able to stop this train wreck.
It doesn't even have to be Americans. That's almost part of the problem. That's why we're so cool with 500,000 plus
I'm
Iraqis.
not American, by the way.
Well,
Just for the record.
It's the human being thing, man. Not to go all kumbaya, but that's why so many millions are allowed to die in Syria or be displaced, or in Iraq through sanctions that killed men, women, and children. We always filter it through this us versus them. We're human beings before any of that shit.
That's where nationalism can be a little dangerous.
I want to know.
I'm sorry?
Nationalism and being patriotic, I think it can be a little dangerous, because it's similar to the tribal conservative versus liberal. It's disliking somebody, demonizing another tribe, another group of people, and it's like you said. I mean, not to sound like a hippie, like George Carlin, but we are all one. We're all on this earth together. Where I think
there's a club and you ain't in it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think there's nothing wrong with being proud. I mean, I was born in Portugal. I'm very proud of my culture. And there's nothing. But the thing is, I also understand every culture. I have friends from Estonia. I have friends that are from Salvador. I have friends from, all over the world. And there's beautiful things about all their cultures. And I think that
Muy obrigado.
but then framing those thoughts of a globalist kumbaya, we know their end goals with globalism, and we also know how important the United States Constitution is, and how important it is to be protected against the aims of globalism and the cloud pivot of collapsing a system financially and making us all slaves of complete socialism. And so for me, Constantina wire at our southern border and stopping those people from pouring over, I think is the just and right thing to do. This is a nation of laws, and it has to be. And I'm a guy that's married to a woman who came from another country on a student visa. She did not speak English when she got here. She became a doctor studying in a language that she didn't even know. She was smart enough to do that. She added to the benefit and the upside of this country, and she did everything legally. And I got to tell you, the kumbaya stuff, I don't agree with it all. I agree, don't blow the shit out of every other nation, but you're not coming here and pouring over and overloading the system, because with 5 billion or more people below the poverty line of Mexico and other nations, we can't possibly help the world by allowing 1 million of them in at a time. We're not going to do it. We're going to do everything opposite of that. We're going to destroy our own nation, and then there's no hope for the world at all, because we have to be the shining beacon that actually is.
I don't think it's necessarily a kumbaya. I mean, I definitely think we need to protect our borders and have, like your wife, come through legally. But this whole conversation in the last 40 minutes has been. I mean, I appreciate the constitutional conversation, but they've been wiping their ass with it for a long time. But they certainly began in 1913 with the Federal Reserve Act and the creating of the income tax, or the federal income tax, which was found in the Supreme Court to be unconstitutional. Direct tax on wages was found unconstitutional numerous times. So I mean, I get that constitutional argument, but I mean, and I'm not saying let's go beyond that, because those things afford us some of the best laws and best protections in the world. But at the end of the day, man, I mean, tomorrow's the 55th anniversary when a coup d'etat took place and blew our president's head off in broad daylight. No accountability. We can go down the list of the shit. There's no accountability. So, I mean, they're declaring wars without going through Congress. The constitutional argument I get, but I mean, when are we going to start really enforcing that? Because this shit's been going on for a long time. And
well,
been
that is
the
up,
Constitution
that is
for a
up
long
to
time.
the people. That ultimately has to be up to the people. And the Constitution was a roadmap for us, when our leaders were breaking the Constitution, which they have been, as you mentioned, and we all know for many decades, that we should be revolting. We should be either at least a tax revolt, and throughout history, tax revolts are about a 50-50 in terms of the leaders dying or an awful lot of citizens dying. So, but if everyone, think of this, guys, if everyone who was, quote unquote, an independent contractor, owned their own business, people who had to file 1099s, people who had to pay quarterly taxes, the people who really truly pay the taxes, if everyone who did that in the nation, or half of us, filed an extension and then another extension and then another extension attached to demands and said, this is what we want, this is what we want, would they listen, or would they arrest or kill all of us?
I think that's one way to remove the participation. I think there are so many different facets, like James was saying. I mean, like we've been kind of agreed on, we're all willing participants of this, so we have to kind of remove ourselves, whether it's taxes, whether it's, financial issues, boycotts, et cetera, for some of these banks, go to a credit union. I mean, however you want to do it. But, we've talked about on the show, Pat, how they make, correcting rain illegal. They frown on self-sufficiency. They want you on their dole. You have to be.
The sheer mention of how I talked about tax revolts and possibly a map for how to get it done in modern times. Welcome to the audit next year, Mr. Miletich.
Yeah, they use it as a tool. It's a weapon for sure, for sure. James, I wanted to ask you about China real quick and the role of international bankers in the growth of that, because I feel like when it came to the United States that they could blend in very easily with Americans, right? I mean, we see politicians who have dual citizenship, and I mean, 2 years ago, I would never have even known that was possible. It wasn't through, joining this kind of truth community I learned this. Is that the same thing that's going to happen in China? Because they can't really blend in, and I feel like China, if you kind of sell out there, there's death at the end of that move. We're here, it's like we see like the Clintons fighting tooth and nail. We have this email problem where it's like there's a good chance she sold secrets to China, and that's what people are trying to hide. And I mean, will there ever be any kind of punishment for that? And what's your thoughts with China and the international bankers?
Well, people can go and look at a podcast I did a few years ago called China and the New World Order, where I laid out at least some of those connections and the financial framework that was laid to allow China to rise to the point where it's at now, and some of the technical, industrial, and military transfers, legal and otherwise, that have occurred since then. And I think the way to understand China is that it is the template for the idea for total control, total governmental control that they want to roll out everywhere in the world. It's starting in China at this point. And David Rockefeller famously said in his obituary to Mao in the New York Times, he said, it was a grand, successful experiment that Mao waged, killing tens of millions of his own citizens along the way. But, you break a few eggs to make an omelet, right? And we see that playing out most obviously now with the rollout of the technological overlay on that control grid, with the social credit scores and the CCTV and the facial recognition, and all of this is coming together now. And we can see what it's looking like in China. You saw that video go viral on Twitter a few weeks ago about the guy on the high-speed train from, I think, Beijing to Shanghai, and it's got that announcement: anything you do on this train will be recorded on your social credit score. This is coming, and we know it's coming.
Minority Report, dude.
I think this is why one of the reasons they're using China as kind of that laboratory. They're also using it as the foil, exactly as Russia, the Soviet Union, was the foil in the Cold War, which was supported by technological and other types of support from from American industry and financiers that propped up the Soviet boogeyman for as long as they needed that boogeyman to be propped up. We've seen the ICIS, Al-Qaeda boogeyman in the last couple of decades, but China is going to be the boogeyman for the 21st century. That's the way they're angling it, and there's the same linkages and the same financial infrastructure which undergirds all of that. It's incredibly important to understand that so that we don't get fooled again, so that we don't let them pull another Cold War or, God forbid, World War III, which is another.
They're growing right under our nose, man. From the expansion of the military bases in the South China Sea, you have what I think it's called the String of Pearls. You have the One Belt, One Road, which is just. I mean, you had Sri Lanka just recently just gave up a port in Sri Lanka to the Chinese for some financial stuff. But I mean, not only those trade routes, but they're also putting military bases on some of these islands in that String of Pearls. And even what is it called? ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. I've been kind of talking about this for a while. I mean, that these trade deals that are just locking down this area, and it's just growing and growing and growing. I mean, I'm going to say it's a problem, but they're already there.
They're taking nation shipping ports for debts that they owe China.
And before we know it, they're going to be there. I mean, they're already there, but before we know it,
I mean, let's face it, they're just taking over the old World Bank IMF game. I mean, they've been doing this for decades and decades and decades, but now China's getting in on it.
Well, and also the production of their petro-chuan, like they've moved away from the petrodollar as well with their introduction of the petro-chuan.
And if I'm U.S. intelligence, I'm obviously working on a way to get. And India and China have had skirmishes in that region up there. I'm doing everything I can to, if China is going to become that much of a threat, which we know it is, I'm trying to figure out how to get India and China to go to global nuclear war against each other.
Yeah, exactly. Like the old British imperial strategy, you want the second strongest power to challenge the strongest power. And it's interesting in that context. It was Tillerson last year just to drop the Indo-Pacific region nomenclature. Now they're not calling it the Asia-Pacific. Now it's the Indo-Pacific, and they are definitely trying to build up India as that sort of bulwark against China. But I think all sides of this are, when you go far enough up the ladder, they're all in on it in a sense.
Well, and that's why I told Pat a while ago, look out for false flags in like northern India, because that Kashmir region, because the One Belt One Road goes through that area, and even in Western China,
India and China, there's something swirling around there, and now they're actually in this Shanghai Cooperation Organization together. They're all full-fledged members of that now, so they have military. Joint military exercises and things like that. But they're also, as you say, last year we're at the brink of actual military confrontation in some dirt path overpass in some mountain somewhere. Like, what on earth does this matter? But it's clearly this is
Western China. The Uyghurs, the Islamic Uyghurs in Western China, those I think are being touched by some of our CIA to radicalize that region to necessitate, the U.S. has to be here now and this goes straight through One Belt, One Road straight to Europe, I believe. So, I mean, the chess game, man, like Zbigniew Brzezinski said, not a fan, but it's the grand chessboard for real.
James, do you see Europe becoming any kind of military power? I know that they're trying to build up their military now, and I think some people in the United States are getting a little nervous about that and what the implications are for our role in the world, policing and stuff. But do you see them as starting to either come together and be in their own kind of military force?
Yeah, well, this is the problem, because the EU is kind of collapsing in front of our eyes, but the problem is they might fail forward and actually try to consolidate even harder. So, Britain might try to remove itself, and maybe they will, maybe they won't. But anyway, we'll just come together even more firmly. And we saw that last year with some forwarding of ideas about formalizing and hardening the shared European borders and bloating up their European, I forget what it's called, Frontex or whatever, their joint military guard around the borders, as a way of saying to the rising populist public, hey, don't worry, guys, we're all European. We're all in this together. We're all a big collective, and we're going to take care of you. And one aspect of that is the super army that they want to create. They've talked about it for years now, and they're at least taking the rhetorical steps forward on that.
Well, and then Macron,
I guess we can hope that they collapse before they're able to really organize like that, but I don't know.
Yeah, Macron comes out with the idiotic statement saying that they want European nations need to build their own army to protect themselves from the United States. which is obviously his lashing out at Trump for the way that he's talked about Europe not holding up its end of the deal and paying its part in NATO and UN and everything else. But I mean, when I look at Macron, Macron's got what is his approval rating? What, 20%, something like that over there. And I mean, I'm surprised they haven't revolted more than just over the gas prices and hung that guy.
I just don't know why people don't go after these politicians. Why? I think that's one thing about the United States, why they keep building us up, is because there is stability here. You know, it's like there's no wild, like, leftist guerrilla army coming and overthrowing Washington, D.C. That always business as usual, which is great as a civilian. You know, you're not going to worry about, you know, all of a sudden there's a coup going on here and there. But sometimes I think it's just like we let these guys get away because they know there's never going to be any.
But these guys are the shadows on the wall. I mean, you can punch the wall and try to get at those shadows, but you're just going to fracture your own hand. And if people go after the politicians, let's string them all up. And that is the exact excuse that the people in control of the real powers want. Okay, now we get to crack down on you because you are violent. Look at, you saw everybody. You saw these guys go crazy. And we got to crack down on them, and we have the right.
Nothing screams stability like Nancy Pelosi.
What is your take on that, James? As being on the outside, the whole liberal versus conservative here, and you know how it's just like they're at each other's necks right now. It's like, I just had a guy on my podcast who's like very liberal, and like the feedback has been insanely negative, and it makes me upset because I like my show to be both sides, to hear both sides of the argument, because there is too much one side echo chamber shit. But what's your take on like liberal? I mean, I hear that liberalism leads to Nazism, but then I look at like a lot of stuff's going on right now with capitalism and how much damage we're doing to the rest of the world, and how there's parts of this United States that are straight up third world, man, straight up third world. Like, what's your whole thoughts on that whole thing?
Look, okay, this is the Canadian and Japan's perspective on this, so, you know, I'm not just telling anyone how to run their own country, but what I'm saying is that there are historical parallels to this. This is not some new thing that's just happening for the first time. I mean, there are different elements to this, like the internet and social media and all that, which throws a whole monkey wrench in the works, but we've seen this before, and it's the rise of the polar extremes. It's the rise of the communists give rise to the fascists. They feed off each other, and there comes a point when you got to choose a side because it just keeps getting more and more divided. And that's where we're heading. And we know where that heads. And it heads in the favor of the ultimate controllers who wanted things like World War II to happen in the first place because, again, all the million reasons, but profit always being one of the reasons, they get to profit from us basically tearing each other apart. And it's hard. It's perhaps impossible to step in once that polarization starts. I mean, how do you stop that process from working? If I had the golden bullet to that, I would have been firing it, or silver bullet. I would have been firing it a long time ago, right? So I don't know what the answers to that is, but clearly this is not a healthy direction for society. But people might argue, hey, maybe it's just part of the pendulum swing. It's got to go this way once in a while to clear things out and get people back on board, because politics is essentially the, you know, warfare by other means. And if we're not agreeing politically, then it's time for warfare, and then we go back to agreeing politically again. And is there a way to avoid that cycle is the real question.
Yeah, if you look at the documentary The Untold History of the United States by Oliver Stone and his book, and if you look at some of the film, some of the old debates, like in black and white with Nixon and Kennedy and you know, some even older politicians, and you look at these debates, it's literally the same shit that they're saying today. Like literally, it's like they're saying that it's, if you put it in color and you replace them with modern day politicians, they're feeding you the same bullshit. And I always say how, like, you know, politicians and those in power, they capitalize on our awful long-term memory. Like we you know, Vietnam happens, and then Iraq happens, then we're almost letting Syria happen, you know, and it's like we keep making the same mistake over and over again, and we just keep pretending like, oh, this time's going to be different, and we keep falling for the same trick over, you know.
Yeah. Tying this back to World War I read this on my video the other last week from Lord Milner's Second War, talking about this Alfred Milner, who was one of the key men making World World War I happened, who wrote in 1893, so decades before any of this happened. He said, "My interests do not run on the lines of party, and if I can help in however small a way to carry out the objects I have at heart, I do not care two straws how the politicians are labeled who execute them." And that was exactly what they ended up doing. They rode the conservative government when they were in power. They
150
rode the liberal
fucking years ago, gang. 150 years ago.
Exactly. It didn't matter who the public voted for or what they voted for. In 1906, the British public explicitly elected Henry Campbell Bannerman on this platform of peace. We have to be the leaders of the world in peace because we're clearly heading towards war. We don't want to go there. People elect him. Immediately, Milner and his gang get their guys in the positions of power in that government, and they just continue making the preparations for war. Same thing that Carroll Quigley was writing about, decades later, when he said that the whole point is to get them to get the two parties so that there's really no difference, so that you can vote the rascals out every 4 years, and it makes no difference to the fundamental policies. And once people get into this political game where it's sports teams essentially fighting against each other.
Fucking WWE, dude. It reads like a freaking W. I mean, when Undertaker lost his streak, I don't know if anybody knows what that means, but he was 22 years, had never lost in WrestleMania, and he lost it, dude. People were losing their shit. Grown people lose. I mean, it's literally almost the same thing.
Well, we're emotional creatures. We love to think that we're these logical, machines that look at the facts, then we come up with these conclusions. But we're emotional creatures, and obviously we all know the history of Edward Bernays and understanding that you can manipulate our desires and the way we think. And
we all don't know who Edward Bernays is. Let's stop assuming everybody knows who that is. Edward Bernays. Seriously, go check out a documentary called what was it called?
Well,
Century of the Self.
Century of the Self. Yes, yeah. It's Adam like Curtis. 11 hours. Yeah. But it is the biggest. I hate to use this euphemism now because someone told me it's but the red pill. It's an ultimate red pill to show how just like Mr. Corbett's video on World War I, how sophisticated these works are. This work to start World War I lasted a decade plus, and it was like 4 or 5 guys who started it.
Well, I mean, Adam Curtis, Century of the Self, a very important documentary. Check that out. Even Noam Chomsky and Manufacturing Consent talked about it. Another good documentary by Richard Grove, State of Mind, The Psychology of Control. They talk about it. I mean, there's tons of great work out there that talk about it. I mean, he's a nephew of Sigmund Freud, wrote Propaganda, the book. And really those techniques were used in everything from corporations were using it to governments to everything. So it's really important. I mean, I know people who... Yes? Yeah, go on, Pat.
No, I was going to say, when we go back through history and see how these wars were put together, very, very complex and sophisticated ways of doing things, putting those chess pieces in place. Little acts, does it give anyone here on this panel any kind of hope when we knew that the United States certainly assisted big time in arming ISIS to take out Assad? Does it give anybody hope? And I've got legitimate intelligence from a guy who's very high up in the intelligence community, and I can sit here and tell you and go back through what I've talked about on my podcast about who this guy is, but I don't want to give away who he is because he wants to remain anonymous. I asked him right away, did Trump, pull the plug on the ISIS funding? And he said, absolutely, 100%. They got in.
But didn't he bring it back?
Hope?
Yeah, but
what's that?
Pat, I thought he brought it back too as well.
Only the white helmets have gotten some money, but nothing on the level of what we've done, in the past under the Clinton State Department and from this gentleman, his assessment, which is legit. Trust me, when you know who he is. Maybe over beers, you guys can get to meet him someday. I'm sure that possibly we will, or let you guys meet him. But it at least gave me a glimmer of hope that Trump is somewhat trying, was trying before they got their hooks into him, to stop this ball from growing and rolling downhill.
Well, This is my problem with all this Trump conversation is that, just like with James Corbett, I mean, believe me, I'm like these guys. I've had Roger Stone on my show. I've had people from Counterpunch on my show. I've had Lee Camp, who's progressive, on my show. I've had so many libertarians. I've had so many different. So I'm open to all perspectives. I never tend to believe that I know the truth with a capital T or that I have it all figured out. I'm constantly readjusting and recalibrating but the thing about this Trump thing is that once we start looking for a nip and looking at like, okay, he did this positive thing or he did that, aren't we almost subconsciously falling into that tribal thinking that we think is so dangerous? And I understand the mindset that we all should have, and that we should always be skeptical. Yeah.
But at the same time, while remaining skeptical, because the more time goes by, the longer it takes for any indictments to be levied against anybody, the longer it takes for the unredacted FISA documents to be released, the more I think Trump was brought in by the powers that be to potentially get a civil war revved up.
Well, I think if you look at a lot of James's research, I mean, one thing you learn is a lot of these things are much more complex than initially it looks like. And sure, when you look at why Trump might be doing one thing and not doing another thing, we might not find out what behind backdoor deals and conversations are happening. And like Jeff said to Brzezinski's book, The Grand Chessboard, we don't know why. We might not necessarily know and understand what the big game plan is quite yet. So I think that's why I kind of reserve my judgment. I mean, one thing I love about James is that he came out with one documentary about Obama's legacy of ashes soon after he left office, and then soon after, I don't know if it was a couple weeks or a couple months later, he had a short documentary called Trump Filling the Swamp. Like I think that's really important. Like I think it's very easy to fall in love and want to believe that this person is the
sure,
he's gonna and I don't know. I mean, it's almost like you briefly brought up the border conversation, the Mexicans coming in here and stuff like that, and protecting our borders. I think that's really we can easily get caught up in that too, and be like, well, who's going to protect us? Well, now we need more government, right? Because we have this boogeyman Mexicans that we don't want coming into our country and ruining our liberty, and so it's like. It almost works in their favor instead of doing what we should be doing, and that's probably instead of spending all this money overseas, blowing shit up. If we help Mexico get on their feet, believe me, I know people from Guatemala, I know people from Mexico. They haven't seen their families in years. They don't want to be here unless they literally needed to be because they had no other chance of survival.
Let me ask James. I want to ask James this specific question because this has been crossing my mind for the past week. We see the eroding support of Saudi Arabia in this country, at least by the media and many of our politicians. And what I see happening, at least in the bigger screen, the chessboard, Syria is destroyed, literally. I mean, it's fallen apart. Russia has helped hold it back together by a shoestring. So Syria is almost done. The last Middle Eastern nation on that list to be destroyed was Iran. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, what a perfect play if America were to make it almost obvious or lure Iran into thinking that America will not defend Saudi Arabia anymore, almost giving Iran the green light to attack Saudi Arabia so that ultimately we can destroy it. And I think that, that's not a far thought in my mind. James, what do you think?
That's the kind of calculus that goes on all the time. So I think it's not wildly implausible. The only thing is I don't think Iran has any intention of attacking Saudi Arabia, and I don't think they're going to be goaded into it by such a ploy. But I think it is extremely important to get to the bottom of exactly why at this time the plug seems to be being pulled on Saudi Arabia. And I'm wondering if this is maybe just an internal Saudi the structure of the government. Maybe they just don't want clown Prince Mohammed bin Salman in power, so they're trying to maneuver one of the other.
It could be a coup, right? There could be a coup going on.
That kind of coup type of thing. Because I don't get it from a geostrategic point why they're doing it right now. They've always had the sort of Damocles hanging over Saudi Arabia, because they can always just pull out the 28 pages or whatever. They can unredact some of the redacted parts and just go, oh, look, it was Saudi behind 9/11. Okay, now we're going to eliminate you guys. They can do that at any time.
And the same could be said strategically as to, while we're in the process of destroying Syria for our purposes of running pipelines or whatever it is we want to do, and also because he's against the American dollar. What a great way to suck Iran into that, because we know that a lot of Iranian forces have gotten involved in that. And so I think that they're pulling at the legs of the dog, which is Iran, from a couple different angles in my mind. Trying
but
to
there's got to be something of that going on, because clearly the main crosshair.
Could it be the petrodollar? Could it be that that Saudi Arabia maybe sees a writing on the wall and wants to get off the petrodollar and wants to stop participating in that? And
bring this into the World War III perspective.
The deal we made with Kissinger back in the day. We'll refine your oil as long as you make the United States dollar your petrodollar, and we no longer need them for oil because we have oil everywhere. Here in our country.
Saudis have been the backbone of the U.S. dollar system for a few decades now in that kind of quid pro quo. But now the question is whether they're going to stay under that umbrella and whether we want them there, and all of that. Those kinds of decisions are being made right now, and part of that calculus is growing relations between Saudi Arabia and China.
I was just going to say. China, it's it, dude. China's it.
Yeah. And Saudi, the U.S. is now a net oil exporter, if you can believe that. So clearly Saudi Arabia sees China as the big growing market for their oil that they know which side their bread's buttered on in the future. If they cozy up more with China and get into the petro-yuan system, then obviously the U.S. wouldn't want that. So that could be the kind of long-term strategic.
Sam always says it, man. Such an interesting time to be alive, and it really is. We are seeing, in a game of risk or checkers, we are seeing some big moves made, and of course they take kind of decades to do. But if you're paying attention to to the breeze, you're seeing the winds of change have definitely come for whether it's the petrodollar, the growth of China. I mean, Saudi Arabia having to make that decision, Iran. And again, the PSYOP continues. I mean, obviously, Iran's on the target still. Syria's on the target list still. It's very, very fascinating. And when you skew it through the filter of, like I said, your movie, and how people need to realize how these things are so just manufactured, maybe not by a few people, but sometimes by a very few people. And the implications are so huge, and millions are affected from, Gulf of Tonkin. Geez, how many millions Vietnamese died over a lie? Or American soldiers, and all of it. Iraqi kids, women under our sanctions, or what's going on in Syria. I mean, it's
Yemen,
insane.
dude.
Yemen, and it's generally almost all horseshit, and having to go back to these financial bankers. But we see these people still lined up, ready to go to war, glass parking lot, the whole fucking place, blah blah blah. It's like,
but if it means France having $7 a gallon or liter gas, and us having $2 a gallon gas, do you support it?
I fuck gas. Fuck.
I agree.
All this shit.
Yeah.
I mean, the pain. I mean, dude. I mean, my phone is what it is because Chinese people live a horrible life to make that phone. That upsets me, dude. It does upset me. I have to participate in it because through what we do, we need these phones to make this stuff all happen so we can have a career talking about what we want to talk about.
Oh, yeah, they put it together in China, but they mine the shit in Africa somewhere. It's all spread. The suffering is well spread out.
For what it's worth, I've stepped away from Twitter this year and realized I never needed it in the first place. And I've already decided once this stupid surveillance device that I carry around in my pocket is done, once it gives up the ghost, that's it. I'm going back to flip phones.
I was just going to say, I need to be
so damn bad.
I need to be like my 75-year-old father, dude, have a flip phone. I don't do just old school.
Well, you want to talk about, modern day Edward Bernays. I mean, you want social media, this technology, the same way Edward Bernays understood how to pull at our, get into our subconscious, get to our desires. I mean, and you've had people who work for Facebook and other people talk about it, how they are, I mean, we're getting serotonin dumps and all these happy chemicals every time we see a like. There's a reason why Facebook doesn't have a dislike button, because it wants you to keep it feeling good when you go on that page. So then you keep going back and you keep going back and you're just holding on to every notification, and you have to get a watch because, God forbid you don't check your phone and so it's like it's so crazy and
even though I'm not a huge fan of the Huxleys, man, Aldous Huxley said it best, and I've repeated this, is there's going to come a point in time, and we're here where we're going to require our enslavement. And that's what essentially, all these little things are that just, I know we don't get it. We think, oh, wow, I can just pay for this with my phone. How convenient. Well, I get, that people don't get digital footprints and how data is the new oil, et cetera, et cetera. It's just, this nice new convenience, and I can keep up with the Kardashians so much better with my phone.
Well, there's a great video on YouTube called "Free is a Lie," and I forget who the guy is who did the video. It's a short video, and he talks about how you get this Google phone and you get all these free services, but he goes into, it's like, but what they're really doing is they're all this mega data. They're paying attention to where you are, who you're with, and they're selling all this information. So we like to look at it as like it's all free, but it's not, and we're giving up privacy. We're giving up our personal information. Yes. I mean. Facebook and Google, they've all done studies where they can figure out, when you're going to go through a divorce before you actually go through it, when you're going to date somebody before you actually announce you're dating somebody, like just by figuring out where you are and who you're hanging out with and what your status updates are. And so we like to think, but this is the thing, and James and I have talked about
AI.
James and I have talked about this, where there's generations growing up today where this is their norm. This is the world they grow up in.
Yes.
So the people who have kind of been able to kind of live in an analog world and then see things transition, we kind of have a better perspective. But this is the new norm. It's like, how do you stop them from accepting what is the norm today? And I think that's the scary part.
They're born digital.
Or are we a bunch of old guys who are telling young people that, like, hey, you video games are going to do this, or TV is going to ruin society and culture, and
my dad suddenly doesn't seem so crazy anymore.
Yeah.
This generation, honestly, like you just said, man, we're at a very crucial time, because we remember cassette tape and CDs, and we remember, rotary phones. I mean, there's going to come a time, and you see videos online now, I don't know how real they are, but they're like, what is, older cats throw down a rotary phone to their kid. They're like, what's this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we, now, like you said, they are absolutely born digital.
Hey,
and they're just.
So while we're holding this conversation, sorry to interrupt you, my Facebook came up with an ad, and I clicked on it.
Shut up.
Build underground survival bunker from scratch.
Are you shitting me?
I remember being a kid and seeing all these people complaining about.
What did they say?
I remember being a kid seeing all these people complain about the devil of music and like crazy people, and then you just see this stuff now with rap, hip hop and rap, and it's so blatant right now. And I'm not trying to be like but it's like there's dark art stuff in that. And I remember mocking those people back in the day, and I go, they were just trying to warn us, and we just laughed in their faces because we just wanted to be like, we just wanted free love and be all that stuff. And it's like,
man.
There's free love, and then there's just like straight up dark art stuff, and I don't.
And social engineering. I think you and I had that conversation the other day. I mean, it's no accident that gangster rap thrived in those days, not more conscious rap. And around that same time, crack cocaine is introduced. Around that same time, the prison system gets commercialized. I mean, it's like, this is social engineering 101.
There's a lot of guns in the ghetto all of a sudden.
Absolutely. And that doesn't negate personal responsibility, but at the end of the day, man, you create poverty, social engineering and poverty. You create poverty, man, you're going to find all of these different elements, dude. So it's,
James is thoroughly disgusted that we've gone off on so many tangents.
Not at all. I'm enjoying the conversation.
And I think the rap, and James and I have talked about this, about, the gangster rap in the 90s. And some people get in debate, like, was it manufactured or was it just promoted? And I don't think it matters. I think either way, if you're manufacturing manufacturing consent, if you're trying to control, young people, the youth, and music's a big part of that. I mean, people joke around about how if Kanye West ran for president, he'd win, not because he has great ideologies and views and perspectives, but because it's a popularity contest. And so, I mean, if you're trying to control, or manufacture consent, control what people think, control the way they look at things, why wouldn't you get into things like art and music and all these things and slowly start molding people's perspectives? And so I don't...
Nothing. I don't think anything gets popular now that MK Ultra came out in the 60s and 70s. I don't think anything gets popular without
invisible hand
and the controllers.
Right. This is the deeper level of analysis because it's not organic versus manufactured. It's that you create the conditions for a whatever Marilyn Man or whatever to come up, and then you promote that. You use your power in the industry to promote this person or that idea, and then it becomes the popular thing.
And you'd be amazed at how many famous people are military brats that are the children of high up military people.
Funny how that works. Right?
Yeah, it is kind of crazy, and you don't see it till you see it. When you see it, it's kind of like, oh my God, it was like it's right there. I maybe I'm just hopeful. I do think the internet is the great equalizer. I do think there is a push to regulate it so they can keep it status quo, but I think it's all blood in the water. They can knock Alex Jones off of YouTube. I see his videos everywhere.
Right.
If they're knocking off Alex, not knocking off James, who I think gives out real information to me.
Right.
Let me bring the downer to the conversation then, because the first place that they're really going to make the organized, concerted effort to push AI technology is going to be online through social media, to the point where you don't know who you're interacting with as a person, or if it's part of this botnet that they're going to create, and personalities generated that you can't tell from the real thing. Things are about to get crazy.
I've already had some very heated debates with bots, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I wouldn't even doubt it. Yeah.
I'm actually happy I'm old, that I'm almost aging out of this time where you got to concern yourself with all that stuff. Like, it's just like, oh.
No,
hence the name of Sam Tripoli's most recently dropped stand-up comedy, No Fucks.
Yeah.
That you can pick up on Vimeo, ladies and gentlemen.
So I'm actually kind of...
If you ever get messages, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, or people trying to argue with you, debate with you, I've gone back and I'm trying to think of the way that I outed them. I've outed a couple bots where they get discombobulated on some of the ways that you ask things, and dang it, I worded some things, and but either way, there's ways of messing with them to where that they don't know how to answer that.
Maybe that's why they were so upset by the NPC meme, because they were literally NPCs.
Yeah, it is crazy how, like, forever it was like the liberal side was coming up with the stuff that'll fight the establishment, and now you see kind of conspiracy side coming up with it. Well, because when there's when you believe in an ideology that's just like, it causes you to be blind, and it makes you not be able to be more creative, in my opinion. That's why
like Bruce Lee said, man, they try to solidify that which was once fluid. These conversations like we're having, we're not necessarily subscribed to right, left, or necessarily dogmatic about our philosophies. We are flexible. We are malleable. You know what I mean?
So flexible that I can point out to Sam that his headphones are made of petroleum.
I'd probably radioactive at this moment. I just want to say something because I got a jam. I just wanted to say something real quick, that being on this show with you guys, when I started my show like 2 years ago, like I would never have ever believed I'd be on with all you guys. I've been Jeffrey, I talk to a lot, but everybody else here, I'm fans of your work, and I've been following Pat forever, but to be on with you guys has been a real honor, and like I really love what you guys are doing. You guys are very important to everything that you're important to humanity, in my opinion. To be honest,
we're on the same team, man. We got to stay on the same team. And then the inserts that are happening, those plants that are happening from the from the elitists that are putting people in place that seem like they're part of our community, and then they go off on some fucking skewed tangent on holograms hitting the Twin Towers and stuff like that. That's the thing, is where we need to stick together and filter all that bullshit out and get rid of those people quickly and not pay attention to them and keep doing what we're doing and stay on the path.
I think that's so important because we've seen it in the alternative media a lot the last couple of years, just people turning on each other and just because they don't agree on one specific thing. And there's tons of topics that I'm sure we all probably disagree with.
For sure.
I've hosted debates with, Adam Kokesh and Hunter Moss on libertarian and whatnot. I just because I think it's important for people to learn that, hey, just because we disagree doesn't mean we can't try to have a discussion. And if our goal's the same, and that's the most important thing, like, what's your goal? Like, we all want to have a safer place for our families, a better world. We all, we're all fighting power and trying to
we're truth seekers.
Yeah, we're truth seekers. We're truth seekers. We're all trying to.
I just don't like to get lied to. That's my biggest thing. That's really what it is. I just don't like to get lied to. I like to know to the best of my ability, and there's a lot of misinformation out there. But I take who gets the money, who gets the power, and how does it fit within how history is played out? If all those line up, I think there's a good chance it might be true. But even then, I don't think it's one of. I don't like getting lied to, and I like to investigate.
Actually, I just pulled a quote from Smedley Butler for my part 3 of this World War I conspiracy, where he said he was trying to educate the soldiers out of the sucker class, and that's a good way of putting it. So I'd like to think that's part of what I'm doing, but it's really nothing so grandiose. It's just that I am interested in history. I'm interested in how the world really works. I have got this platform where there are people who are supporting me to do this work, so I'm going to do it. This is amazing. This is wonderful.
Just like we're on the ripple effect, man. We are the butterfly flapping its wings in Tampa, Florida, creating a monsoon in China, ladies and gentlemen. Right. You never know.
But at the end of the day, if nothing else, I think my experience just shows what is possible now. I am literally an English teacher in Japan who became this podcaster, and I'm doing this from my living room in Japan. Like, what on earth is this even? I don't know, but I'm just going to continue doing it while people are doing it.
Been watching you for years, sir. I've been watching you for years.
What a wonderful time to be alive.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. And Sammy, you got a set tonight, don't you?
Yeah, I got it's called Third Eye Comedy, and I'm getting Jimmy Dore and Graham Elwood and all these outside the box thinkers to do a show together. We'll see if anyone shows up, but I'm super excited for it.
Dude,
awesome, dude.
Comedians are now the new. I mean, they are the ones breaking the boundaries and have the ability. I mean, people like Sam who are willing to go out on a limb and talk about controversial issues. I just had Jim Florentine on last night, and he went on a huge vaccine big pharma conversation, and it's awesome that you guys are willing to do that, and I can't thank you guys enough for being on. Like I said, I think we all come from different backgrounds, and hopefully everything from James's fans to Pat and Jeff, Sam's, my fans, everybody can come together, realize that even though we're all slightly different, we're all here for the same goal, and that's much more important than falling into, because like we talked about in the beginning of the show, exactly what they want us to do is not focus on our similarities, but take those little differences and just fight till the end of time about those things. Let's just fight, and then those in power who really don't give a shit about ideology. It's like that movie Network. There is or there's only DuPont. There's only these corporations. Those are the people who are pulling the strings, and those are the ones that we should be putting our.
Do you
attention
believe
on.
in? And I'll ask this one last thing. Do you voice your opinion on this? Your vote. Do you think in our lifetime we'll ever see a Rothschild hanging from a tree?
Wow.
Yes or no?
One can only wonder.
I think it's very possible.
I mean, I would like to see something happen.
Well, yeah, I think it's possible. I don't think it would change a thing about the way the world works.
Yeah, I don't think. See, this is where I think what like Sam said, to quote him again. I think the revolution will be podcasted. I think when we talk about people like Smedley Butler, you talk about the business plot. It's conspiracy that almost happened a long time ago, and it's like if that shit can happen, if what happened yesterday, 55 years, or tomorrow, 55 years ago. If that can happen, then what the fuck can't happen? And I think people have to start.
So do we all have to So do we all have to come to the point where to not support this machine, okay, A, we have to ride bicycles because we can't spend any money on gas. 2, we got to grow our own food. We got to raise cattle and chickens in our back fucking yards. We got to dig our own well so we don't pay for water. We got to have solar panels so we have our own power. So that's what you're saying we have to do instead of hang all the motherfuckers.
Well,
yeah, hang them, and then who takes the place of all of those positions? It'll be the same.
Yeah, he's going to say you can't legislate. You cannot legislate evil, dude.
Or even worse could happen, dude.
Or even worse could happen, and probably would, because they've got that backup.
I know there weren't people jumping up and down to replace Quisling.
Well, when they kill Gaddafi, when they kill Saddam, when they kill, they're sold the same idea. Like this evil person, if we take him down, things will be better. And then it's just another corrupt person in place.
Never gets better.
It never gets better. And
it's never about an individual. It's always an ideology.
Absolutely. So I won't hold you guys up. I know it's a day before Thanksgiving, so hopefully you guys have a wonderful holiday with your friends and family. Have a drink and
happy Thanksgiving.
Enjoy, guys. I can't thank you guys enough for being on. Hopefully we can do it again. Of course, the guy who writes all the emails and put this together isn't even seen on camera, which sucks, but it is what it is.
Well, we appreciate him. Appreciate you, brother.
We got the best.
Dude, you did a great job putting this together. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks, and hopefully, I know James is a very busy guy. Sam, Pat, Jeff, you guys all have other shows and other work. But if we can do this, even if it's twice a year, if it's a couple times a year, whatever we can do, let's come together. Let's
quarterly. Quarterly.
Yeah, quarterly. If possible, let's do it. Let's. We had a great conversation, and
let's keep the tinfoil Ripple Farm report going.
That's the name of this episode, dude.
I think it is. I think it is. I spent like a whole month coming up with names, and Jeff in like 2 seconds just threw them all away. He's like, that was awesome. So yeah, maybe that's what we'll call it.
I'll put this out as soon as possible if you guys don't mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
better.
So whenever you can send us this, I'd love to put this out because it was an excellent conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.
Awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Good to see all of you. Love you guys, man. Happy Thanksgiving.
Love you.
Thank you, everybody.
Take care.